Welcome
to the summer.
The 6 hours of summer that we get in the Highlands has started. You know what all the bees are buzzing behind. It sounds like they're swarming. They're not. They're just like catching up on 8 months of cold and wet.
Come on, hurry up. We've only got 5 hours left.
We've got so much to do in today's 6 hours of summer.
We have.
I've got to go and see to the bees, and I'm not giving anything away.
Ooh.
But I'm going to tell you how you'll be able to get your hands on some honey later.
We ain't got any yet.
I'm not giving anything. No spoilers. What are you doing?
Me, I'm going to make an honesty box.
Is that like a confessional?
It is, yeah. The priest is sat on one side.
Can you imagine me in a confessional? I'd be in there a week. He'd faint. You'd just hear this like thud on the floor.
Yeah.
And he'd like whimper, you can't say that.
The priest wouldn't be able to cope with your confession.
Right, I'm going to go get my bee suit on. Sean's going to have his second poo. And then we've got to get busy.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that it's been a very long, cold, wet, windy winter. And that spring was definitely a little bit later starting this year. Now, back in March, when I inspected the bees behind me, they all had plenty of stores left. I was really confident that they'd have more than enough to get them into the spring. But then by the end of March, I started noticing that quite a few were actually running really low. Some had run out of stores altogether. And I had to start feeding them fondant just to keep them going. Now, I only expected to be feeding them for maybe a couple of weeks, just until the weather picked up, it got a bit warmer and drier. But that didn't happen. It just kept raining and the wind kept blowing. And I ended up feeding them for well over a month. And each hive was going through about 1 kilo of fondant every single week. But then a couple of weeks ago, it all changed. And boy, did it change. They were bringing in plenty of pollen, and that was good because it meant that they had enough to feed the baby bees. But because there were so many baby bees, the hive started to fill up. But because the weather wasn't that good, they couldn't get out to forage, and even on the odd day when they could, there's virtually no nectar for them to bring back to the hive to eat. So the hive was filling up, and they had no food. But it's only taken a couple of weeks for the weather to get warmer and drier and sunnier, and the hive is now literally a hive of activity. There's a lot of nectar coming in, still a lot of pollen, and not only are the bees now able to feed themselves, they've also, some of them, nearly filled their first honey super with honey. As the colonies expand, they start to bring in more pollen and more nectar to store. But the queen also needs space in there for brood to lay eggs. So as the colony expands, they need more room to store the excess nectar, and that's why we put these honey supers on. So the queen has got the brood box to lay the brood, and they store some nectar for stores and the pollen in there to feed the young. But then they store all the excess nectar, which turns into honey, in these honey supers. Now, if they carry on bringing in and storing nectar at the rate they are at the moment, this first honey super on most of the hives is going to be full within a week or so, maybe even less. So I need to get back to the bee barn and build some more supers. So a honey super starts off looking a bit like that, which is a flat pack. The reason I buy them in a flat pack is because it's cheaper, and I just build them myself, and this is what they look like when they're built. And then we turn these bits of wood into frames which look like that, and that's wax foundation, and the bees will draw that out, build cells in there, and that's where they put the nectar, and then basically just put about between 10 and 12 frames in these boxes, and we go and put them on top of the brood boxes on the apiary, and the bees hopefully, well, they are doing already, because some of them have filled one of these boxes already with nectar. So I'm preparing a second box to go and put them on for when the first box gets full. Fingers crossed anyway. Each frame's made up from 5 pieces of wood, a sheet of beeswax foundation and 11 nails. Now, it used to take me just over 3 minutes to put one frame together, but I managed to get a nail gun in the sales a few months ago, and that means I can now build one in less than a minute. I'm using wired foundation in these frames because the early summer honey won't be as thick as the late summer heather honey. And that means I'll be able to extract it using my radial spinner, which is good because then I can reuse these frames again for the next harvest. So that's one box done. So there's 12 frames in here, 12 shallow frames. Now if I show you the frame, you can see it's about yay big. Now there's 12 in this one. But I've done some others that have only got 10. So if you look in that one, you can see that these are a bit more spaced apart. It's exactly the same frames inside it. They're not different. They're exactly the same. They're just spaced out a little bit more. And the reason I'm trying these two different types is because when there's 12 frames in a box, the honey is not going to be as thick as it is on where there's 10 frames. Because there's more space in between the frames, the bees can store the honey a bit thicker. So I'm going to see which one works better for me and which one I get more honey from, or which is easier to process when it comes to uncapping it and jarring it up. So I guess we'll have to wait until the end of the season before we know that. This is the wax foundation that I put in the frames. Now, if you look very carefully, if I hold it up to the light, you can see a wire running through the foundation, and it comes out at the bottom at 3 ends, and those 3 ends fasten to that wooden frame, and that gives the foundation some strength, because when the bees draw this out and start storing nectar and then capping it off with wax, it gets really heavy, and so it needs some strength to be able to hold itself together. So that's what I'm using for the spring and summer crop, because it's going to be like a runnier honey than the heather honey. And then what I'll be able to do is when we put these in the extractor and spin it out, we can use the foundation again because it will already be built up. The cells will be there and we can use it again. The bees will clear it out. They'll clear any bits of honey out and we can use these again next season. Later in the year, when the heather honey starts, we'll be using this. This is a different foundation. You can see this is actually a broken piece, but you can see there's no wire running through this, and it's very, very thin compared to the other foundation. And this is what we're going to be using for a lot of the heather honey harvest this year, because we can actually cut this comb with the heather honey on it. We can cut it straight out and put it in containers and put it in jars, and it's called cut comb honey. So that's what we're going to be using for some of the honey later this year. With the weather warming up and the bee colonies growing, I've set up a bait hive to catch any swarms. They're really easy to put together. I'm using one of my polynuke boxes, which is about half the size of a normal brood box, and I'm putting a couple of old drawn out empty frames inside because the smell of the wax and the honey and propolis will hopefully lure the bees towards it. I'm also adding a couple of empty new frames inside just to give the swarm anything to build on. I'm putting the first bait box on top of the stable roof. It's out of the way here, but it's still close enough to my other hives. You can just see them left of the middle near the top of the picture. So if any of my own bees decide to swarm, there's a higher chance I'll be able to tempt them into this box. Now, because the lid's ventilated, I've built a sturdy roof just out of some old bits of wood, and it keeps the rain off, but it still gives them plenty of fresh air. After screwing the lid on securely, I'm putting this heavy rock on top of the whole polynuke just so that the wind doesn't blow the bait box off the roof. Now, there's a good reason I'm placing it up here. I've caught 2 swarms in the last 2 years, and both of them came from the 2 trees either side of where I've put this bait box. And I've also added a couple of drops of lemongrass oil, which it's thought attracts the bees. So I'm going to come back and check it every couple of days, and I'll let you know if a swarm moves in. I'm always getting questions about the bees. It's really good that so many people are fascinated as I am about them anyway. First question I'm going to answer this time is there any difference in the taste of honey in regards to what the bees are foraging from? Yeah, definitely is. Last year when we were doing the heather honey harvest, the honey just smelled really, it was gorgeous. It was like a vanilla toffee, really sweet, just a hint of floral fragrance, but it was very sweet and vanilla tasting and smelling. Whereas the wildflower honey that we're getting at the moment, We haven't tasted it yet because they're still bringing it in and it's not capped off yet, but the smell is very different. It's a much sharper floral. It's like a concentrated floral smell rather than that sweet toffee smell. So I can't wait to taste it, but I think it's going to be very different to the heather honey. Another good question is, do the bees encounter intruders to the hive and how do they deal with them? Yeah, there's always threats. I mean, if you look at the amount of honey that's in a hive, there's no wonder that any other species want to get in there and get to it. So animals as small as ants try and get in there, and earwigs and insects and things like that. You also get things like wax moth, and you get little mice, especially in the winter. Also wasps and hornets and yellow jackets. We don't have a problem with hornets up here in the far north of Scotland, but they are becoming more of a problem in England. They literally have guard bees and the entrances are really narrow, so that kind of cuts down what can get in. But they do have guard bees on duty to watch out for intruders. And anything that they don't want in there, then they'll generally surround and bundle out, or they could even kill them. Now, if the bees are robbing another hive of the honey, that can get quite nasty because you get a lot of bees dying and fighting. It's not something, touch wood, it's not something that I've seen. Yeah, we get ants and things like that, but not of the scale that causes them a problem at all. Another great question I got this week is, how easy and costly is it if you've got no experience to start beekeeping, and is it worth the outlay for just one hive? I think absolutely. I started with 2 hives and I was kept busy for that first summer, especially when one of them swarmed within a few weeks of getting them. Costly, it depends. If you can get somebody to give you a hive, I know people that give hives away, then it wouldn't cost you much. And if you get a swarm of bees, or somebody can give you some bees, you could literally start it for next to nothing. If you are buying it from new, you can get a hive similar to mine. There's lots of different types of hives, but I'll give you an example based on what I use. So you could get a setup like I get for brand new, about £200. And then a colony of bees probably would cost you a couple of £100 again. So you could probably get going for well under 500 quid. That's if you were buying everything as new on a budget. Is it worth it? Well, I can't really answer that. I think it depends what you want from it. If you're doing it for money, then probably no, I don't do it for money. I do it because it helps my mental health. I can really zone out, and when I'm kind of dealing with the bees, and it is hard work when you get the honey. I'm dreading it this year with all the honey, hopefully, that we'll get. So I think, is it worth it? You can't really answer that, because there's a kind of financially, is it worth it? Which I would say no, unless you wanted to go into bee farming, which is something I wouldn't do. But is it worth it as a hobby and for your mental health? Then yeah, absolutely. Another question I got this week, it's quite a common question as well, I get asked it all the time, is how many bees are there in one hive? Again, it varies. If it's quite a small hive, then it can be as low as probably 20,000. If it's really busy, you could get 60, 70, maybe 80,000 bees in one hive. I remember last year, some of mine were growing at such a rate that I was taking the lid and the crown board off, and then when I take the crown board off, it was like somebody had turned a hose on and they were just kind of spilling out everywhere. Honestly, I've never seen so many bees. I was talking about honey earlier on, about what we take and what we leave. And again, we had some questions this week about how do we know what honey we can take from a colony and how much we have to leave so that they have enough food and stores to get through winter. Any honey that they store in the brood box, which is the bigger box at the bottom of the hive, is theirs. So we don't touch that honey at all. And generally that's what we leave them. And most of the time, that's generally enough to get them through the winter. Of course, we had I wouldn't say a harsh winter, but it was very long, cold, wet, windy winter. And spring, we didn't really get the good weather until now, kind of middle of May. So I ended up feeding them. So we only take the honey that's in the honey supers, which is what we've been talking about today. That's all we take. We don't touch any in the brood box. And usually, like I say, that's enough. But sometimes if it's like it's been this last few months, we have to feed them extra fondant as well. But there's no point in leaving a super on because you don't know. Usually it's okay without it. But yeah, that's what we do. We take the honey from the supers and leave the honey in the brood box for the bees. It's funny because we were talking about honey supers on the live chat at the weekend.
We were.
And we came up with this spontaneous idea.
We did.
Not like spontaneous human combustion.
No, we don't want that.
Sometimes when you're away, I'm scared that that'll happen to me and you'll come home and find some charred legs sticking out of the bed.
I worry about his mind.
You're right to do that. Anyway, we were talking about honey supers and we came up with a little idea. So we need more honey supers. We need a lot more honey supers, probably about another 20.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to have honey coming out of his ears.
Well, we had an idea. If you fancy some of our honey, we're creating like a VIP list for people.
Yes.
And we've got the people that we buy all our bee equipment from. Sell kind of second supers, seconds. There's little knots in the wood and things like that. But
that's all right.
They're absolutely fine and they're about half the price of normal ones. And we thought if you buy a honey super, well, an e-voucher for a honey super with the frames in it, we will put you on our VIP list. And then as soon as we get the honey, we will send you as a gift a jar of the honey from your honey super.
That's amazing.
That is a good idea, isn't it?
Even
Now,
in America?
Yeah, if you live in the UK or in the United States, we can do this because we can send you it as a gift. So the details are in the video description. There's a link about buying a honey super and getting honey as a gift. So all you need to do is follow the instructions in the video description.
Are they in English?
They are in English. Well, it's like a combination of Yorkshire and Scottish.
Oh, God, no,
So
you'll
just
understand it.
Talking Yorkshire, but with a bit of a Scottish twang. Follow those instructions, and we'll send you some honey. That's ace, isn't it?
It's brilliant.
But in the next, like, 4.5 hours, because the 6 hours of summer ends, done it pretty soon, and then we're all screwed again. You might have noticed Sean's new honesty box. Has it not got any handles on it yet?
It's not got any handles on it yet. I'm waiting for them to arrive.
Oh, look at this. He's even managed to grow some turf inside it. How cool is that? And what are you going to be putting in there?
Eggs and marmalade, and when the honey's ready, the honey as well.
That is cool. Speaking of marmalade...
Oh, yes.
Sean's been very busy making marmalade.
I'm sick of seeing it.
This past couple of weeks. We've been waiting on the tamper labels, but we've been told they are due any day. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little mini vlog and then just publish that when we're ready, when you can start to buy it online.
That's another good idea.
It is a good idea, isn't it? So remind us what flavours we've got. I know we've got Seville orange.
Seville orange. We've got Seville orange and lemon. And then we've got shredless, orange shredless that is. And we've got orange and whiskey, and that is, oh, that's special.
I think the orange and whiskey is going to be very popular.
I might have to make some more now.
Don't you? I feel like I've got a bogey. Have I got a bogey?
Stop picking your nose on camera, no.
Do a live check. Some people might get off on that, you never know, do you?
Stop picking your nose.
Right, I think we've actually got a lot done in this 6 hour. We've got another 4 hours to enjoy. Shall we go down the beach?
Yeah.
Yay! I hope you've enjoyed this vlog. If you have, and if you're not already, subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and if you hit the wibbly wobbly notification bell, YouTube will send you a little message whenever we release our video.
It'll say Foxes Afloat and release more rubbish.
Oh, it'll say Foxes Afloat. Take care of yourself. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Ta-ra!